Welcome, Sanbonani. I'm Ishereta. You are on Family Matters with your host, Khanyisa Mutema. This show is meant to educate, empower, and strengthen South African families. We delve into different dimensions that affect families. We look at the socio-economic, we look at the historical, traditional, and cultural matters that impact families. On this show, we have experts, we have government, we invite community leaders, we invite religious leaders. And today we have Ms. Lethabo Sikele from WorkWell Institution, and we are going to discuss mental health in families. Welcome, Lethabo.
Thank you, Khanyisa, for having me, and hi to your viewers at home.
If you can just share with our viewers, what is WorkWell?
The WorkWell program is a workplace mental health program. Mm-hmm. So we focus on equipping companies with putting in place preventative strategies and strategies to manage mental health in the workplace. So we identified that a lot of people with mental health conditions often resign from their jobs because of a perceived lack of support from employers. So the important thing really is to remove the stigma that people with mental health conditions cannot remain in employment, that people with mental health conditions cannot contribute positively to the economy. So we really just want to equip organizations to support individuals with mental health conditions so they can stay in the workplace and also be economically independent.
It's awesome that you focus on the workplace, but obviously things start at home. And before people get to the workplace, their families need to have known about them. Their families need to be equipped to support people. Their communities need to support them. Mm-hmm. Are people, do they have an understanding of what is mental health? Mm-hmm. Because that's
true.
You know, and and that's the end of you.
Yeah.
You know, and then you find people picking up papers on the side of the road. Mm-hmm. Please, can you explain to the viewers what is mental health?
So, Kanye, I think there are two dimensions to mental health conditions and what could actually cause them. As much as things, start at home, the workplace is also a leading cause of some of very stressful, life events or situations. So the important thing is that even if something is, a mental health condition is work-induced, for instance, as a result of stressful work conditions, you are correct in that eventually individuals have to go back to their families, and their families are the ones who need to be aware of what it is that they're going through and what they need from them in terms of caregiving and taking care of them. So what is mental health? I think it's very important to distinguish between mental health and mental illness. Mental health is something that we all have, right? So the only difference is that we are on different sides of the spectrum. So on the, let's say for argument's sake, on the yellow side of the spectrum, you would have someone that is mentally healthy, they are productive, they go to work, they enjoy life. And then on the other far end of the spectrum, you have individuals that are not functioning well, and they have developed a mental health condition or a mental illness. So that is the difference. So mental health, we all have it, but it's just really where we are on different sides of the spectrum. And then mental illness really is that. It's a manifestation of mental health conditions that make it difficult for you to cope with life's events.
Okay, so you're saying that some people are born with it, others it's induced based on circumstances.
So a lot of people ask that actually, what is it that causes mental health conditions or mental illnesses? There is no clear-cut, cause of mental illness. So some people, it's induced by trauma, traumatic experiences. A traumatic experience, let's say for instance in the workplace, someone could have been hijacked perhaps at a parking lot at work, and then that results, for instance, in PTSD. Another traumatic event, we know of them, could be rape, it could be the death of a loved one, just trauma to the brain, and some are actually born with mental health conditions. So there's a genetic element to it, and there is a social element to it as well.
Okay. Wow, okay. So also basically there's various ways that mental illness can come about.
Yes, correct.
Okay. Now, we're sitting in a country, COVID happened.
Mm-hmm.
A big trigger. I was personally stressed.
Yeah.
And
we all were. Yeah.
I was extremely stressed.
Mm-hmm.
I was stressed about even just remaining alive.
Absolutely.
Without even worrying about my livelihood or anything, just staying alive. There was a lot of anxiety
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of coping mechanisms that I had to take up. But the viewer at home, and some people are still in that,
Mm-hmm.
and a majority of the country, I would think, are still in that sort of unknown place where they don't know what's coming next.
Absolutely.
And I think after the break, you will please share with us what has happened, how has COVID impacted families, and how can, most importantly, how can families get help and members of families. Welcome back. You're with your host Khanyisa Mutema on Family Matters. We are unpacking the issue of mental health in families. With us here is Ume Litabo Sikele, and Usis Litabo has shared with us what mental health, mental illness is, how it comes about. Some people are born with it. Some conditions are also they're also driven by circumstances and are due to different types of traumas that people suffer. And just before the break, you are about to unpack the impact of COVID on families, on the mental health in families. But before we go there, I would like to know about what led you to have such a passion on actually empowering families on issue and organizations on understanding mental illness.
Mm-hmm.
If you could share a bit about yourself, if you could also share about your company and the vision of your company.
Okay, so Work Well, I think also as the name kind of alludes to, it's really about creating conducive work environments
Mm-hmm.
that are supportive and create a supportive culture rather around mental health. Mm-hmm. So that was born out of my own experience.
Okay.
I was diagnosed with attention hyperactivity deficit disorder.
Okay.
Attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD. It's quite a long name.
Is that for adults?
So ADHD, it can be for adults, it can be for kids, but now I think increasingly, like myself, I got diagnosed at a young age. So there's more and more adults that are being diagnosed much later on. Okay. So the diagnosis with ADHD came also with a diagnosis with anxiety and depression. So the ADHD part, it really is what led to me kind of having a breakdown of sorts. Mm-hmm. Because my work was beginning to be very impacted. So the effect that the ADHD had in the workplace, which I later found out when I saw a psychiatrist, that a lot of the things that I was experiencing at work were as a result of that condition, and I was unaware. Things like always being late. I know it sounds like, well, we all run late, but it's a very kind of, pronounced inability to keep track of time, and you wonder, I wake up so early in the morning, why can I not keep track of time? You don't read emails. Even when you do, it just feels like such an uphill battle. So I find myself with like 5,000 emails in my inbox, and you can imagine it in a professional environment.
Context, yeah.
You can't afford to do that. That's literally you dropping the ball, right? So I ended up in a psychiatric clinic. really just out of not being able to manage with work. I was trying to figure out, why is everyone coping so well? My colleagues seem to be working well and, you know, working well under pressure. They're responding to emails, they go to meetings, and what's wrong with me, you know? And that's when I discovered that I've got this condition, and that prompted me to really reach out to other individuals that I met, some at the psychiatric clinic, others that I just had informal conversations with individuals around how are they coping with mental health at work, you know? So yeah, that's what the program was born out of.
Sure. So are you saying you only picked this up when you're a professional, but when you're a child growing up at school, how was your performance at school? And this, I'm asking for parents that are out there, they're sitting with children, and maybe the kids are struggling at school. They're not necessarily struggling academically, but they're being viewed as being naughty, you know, and not focusing. And, you know, as we know, our schooling systems are not quite equipped to pick up, especially government schools, to pick up such conditions. Please, if you could share, as a child growing up, what happened? Did you pick up? Were there any complaints? You would know.
Yeah, absolutely. So you're touching on something very important. There's a huge misconception, especially around ADHD, that I think one of the easier signs of ADHD is that kids that are not able to sit still, they can't pay attention, they are bouncing off the walls, they're all over the place. But interestingly for me growing up, I was a relatively good kid. I performed very well in school, very well behaved. But I later found out that one of the signs that I missed of ADHD in early childhood, because apparently you don't develop it in adulthood, it was already there in childhood and I was not aware, was basically holding on, like delaying tasks. So I was that person that studied like last minute for every single test, and I always came out top of my class. So I think my family did not have a problem did not suspect anything could be wrong with me, because I was, you know, a good student. I was a good child. The only thing was that I was always doing things last minute.
So you'd study the night before? I
would study the night before. No one really cared. No one really bothered, because I was still doing well, you know?
Okay, so no one picked it up because you're doing well academically. And that's what I think where families pick it up that there's an issue is when the academic performance is impacted, correct?
Absolutely.
And there's a complaint from the teachers. Okay. Yeah. Interesting. Okay, let's go to COVID quickly, just before we go on a break. What has been the impact of COVID on the mental well-being of families?
I think COVID, more than anything, just exacerbated a problem that already existed, you know. So if you have someone in the family that's living with a mental health condition, COVID basically now forced a lot of families to confront that and to begin to be able to, you know, provide support 24/7. You're literally at home with this person, you know. So a lot of families during COVID, I think, began to grapple with individuals within the family that have existing mental health conditions and having to be there for them 24/7. That in itself is I don't want to say it's a burden, but it can take a lot of strain for families. You know, so what now you're actually forced to be at home to take care of, you know, a loved one that has a mental health conditions, whereas usually work gives you the opportunity to take time off, you know, you can go to work, come back, but now literally you're at home with this individual, you know. So that in itself, I can say has been quite strenuous on families. But also in terms, I just want to go to the work issue. COVID-19 resulted also in a lot of isolations for a lot of people, which meant that some people at home began to develop anxiety. People began to develop depression out of being, you know, isolated from colleagues, etc. So it also COVID has also led to the development of some mental health conditions. I think that could have created a lot of strain and tensions within families.
Okay, and we're about to take a break now. When we come back from the break, let's see how we can advise families and help them that are sitting at home. They don't have medical aid. They don't have the luxury of even work wellness programs, you know, where one can go for counseling, you know, that's included in your work package. Let's see how we can empower families. Let's see how we can also remove the stigma that's associated with mental illness. Welcome back to Family Matters, where we are discussing a very sensitive issue of mental health. And with us in studio, we have Melithabo Sikele, who has actually gone through being diagnosed of ADHD, depression, and she's actually living a very healthy life, and she's functioning very normally, I can assure you. I just want to know, Osilithabo, how are you coping with the diagnosis which was made, you know, when you got admitted, and what medication are you taking, and also the financial implications, because I can imagine just going to a doctor for a flu is not cheap, let alone going for such a complex and specialized issue.
Yeah.
You know, please can you share with the viewers as to how have you gotten to where you are?
I think it's important to, we spoke earlier about, you know, the effects of ADHD on my functioning and how it affected work. It also affected, you know, relationships with family, with friends, colleagues, etc. The diagnosis for me was a huge breakthrough because, one, I understood that ADHD does not have to be a lifelong condition. It isn't. When it's well managed, you can completely recover from it. So I was put on the medication, and it was the best thing to ever happen to me because it restored my functioning. It restored, I just felt like whatever that condition disrupted in my life was restored. So that is why I always advocate for getting help. But in the same breath, getting that help, as you're saying, it's a costly thing, you know. This country, we still have a very long way to go, especially for the ordinary citizen that does not have access to medical aid. And even when you do have medical aid, the medical aid still have a long way to go in terms of benefits for mental health. So from an economic perspective, it's very costly. So with the medical aid plans, for instance, you need to be on a premium plan to be able to access psychiatrists as and when you need them, to be able to access your therapists. The medication is pricey, you know. So I think that in itself also can be very strenuous for families from an economic perspective, you know. The financial implications of dealing with the mental health conditions are dire, you know. Yeah, so I think just even having, if I'm correct, about 5% of the country's health budget is towards mental health, and mental health that is meant to serve the public. That is not sufficient enough.
You feel there's a bigger budget?
There is a bigger budget. There's a bigger budget, and I think even the budgeting for me is a reflection of how seriously we take mental health in this country. We still have a very long way to go in terms of that.
So roughly, how many institutions do we have? These are government institutions where families sitting out there and they say, my daughter, my son, or my husband, my wife needs attention. They can see something is not working the way it's supposed to, or the person, something has changed in a person's behavior. Where do they start?
The starting point, I think, SADC, it's a not-for-profit organization, the South African Depression and Anxiety Group. It's not-for-profit, it's open to the public. They've got counselors online, they've got a helpline, they've got crisis lines, they've got support groups for families. that are taking care of loved ones with mental health conditions. So I would always advise people to reach out to SADC, because then they're able to, in different communities, locate you with the support systems that are available in your communities. That has been, unfortunately, it had to come from a NPO, a not-for-profit organization, rather, because our government is just not up to scratch. They're not up to standard when it comes to providing those facilities. So I strongly urge families to get in touch with SADC, and they will be able to redirect them to the different help centers in their communities.
Okay, and how do they get hold of SADC?
You can go onto their website, and I think they've got all these categories of whatever you need help with, whether it's depression or anxiety or whatever it is, you'll be able to get all the lines for that.
Wow. Thank you, Meskele, especially sharing your personal story.
It's only a pleasure.
And to help the viewers, what advice do you have for the viewers just before we close?
So the advice is, mental health conditions are more prevalent than we think. We need to really start being open and having open dialogue around mental health to break the stigma. Especially with our young kids now, there's so much pressure. They're living in a completely different world. There's a lot of access to information and technology, and there's all these societal pressures on teenagers especially. And we make the mistake of dismissing symptoms that are problematic and worrisome. We say, just teenagers being teenagers or kids being kids. I encourage families especially to educate themselves on mental health, to educate themselves on how it affects teenagers. SADC has a wealth of resources on that. So let's educate ourselves as families, as a society, to be able to break that stigma and avoid unnecessary suicides, which surged actually during the pandemic. So just get educated, learn about mental health so you can better be able to take care of your families.
Meskele, thank you for that. And viewers at home, if there's a company that would like to enlist Meskele services through WorkWell, please get in touch with her. Her details are on the screen. And also, you beloved family there, sitting there at home, you don't need to commit suicide. You don't need to do any drastic thing. Just speak out, call SADC, call a neighbor, call a friend. If you feel like you're losing it, okay, and you don't have it all together, seek help. There's always someone that you can confide in and who can help you. Thank you for that. You with your host, Khanyisa Muthema. See you next time. Same place, same time.